So just to kind of pick this up, try to get us back on track here. So we've talked about a service animal is a dog, right? Then we have these other animals. They are comfort animals, emotional support animals that offer some sort of enrichment to somebody's life, okay? But we need to keep in mind that they are not service animals. They do not have protection under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Oftentimes people will say, well, I can get a letter from my doctor, right, that says this cat or whatever is here to help me, right? So now I need to take the cat with me, or maybe it is a dog. But simply having a letter from a doctor that says you have a need for this animal does not make that animal a service animal, nor does it allow you the same protection that a service animal would have. Okay? Yes, ma'am?
I might be getting ahead, but emotional support animals are protected by the Fair Housing
That's
Act.
correct. You're getting,
so they can
yeah.
they can live with you in an apartment,
right,
but they can't like go to the grocery store.
Right. We'll get to that in a minute. Yep.
I have a question. So if a spider monkey or a pot-bellied pig performed a number of tasks to mitigate an individual's disability, would that fall under the same exception that the miniature horse does?
No, they would not have the same protection that a horse or a dog has.
Because it specifically says dog.
That is correct.
And there has been a guideline to include horse.
That's correct.
But there has not been a guideline to include a monkey of
That is
some
correct.
sort.
And I think probably some of that is that a lot of states outlaw monkeys, period. Like in Kentucky, you're not allowed to own a capuchin monkey anymore. So I think that was part of the reason why that legislation was left out.
So even if the animal is performing tasks
That's
to
right.
mitigate a disability, it's still considered a comfort animal.
That is correct. It would not have the same protection as the dog or the horse.
And just as for instance, if you went into a restaurant and they could say you're not allowed to bring your monkey in under the ADA.
Okay. So, how do you know if it's a service animal? I had this conversation the other day. My stepdaughter, she's 17. She is going to work at a Mexican restaurant here in town, and she's going to be the host, right? So this was my opportunity to, what did they tell you about service animals? So the first thing she said is, look for a vest. Ooh. Oh. I said, well, what if the dog doesn't have a vest? And she said, go find a manager. So she did the right thing.
The manager know?
Go find the manager. So if you're unsure, like say you're a business owner, there are two questions and two questions only that you can ask of that handler if you're unsure. Now, obviously, if Steve walks in, pretty obvious Steve's blind, right? And the service or the store manager would not say, you know, why do you have this dog? It's pretty obvious. It's a guide dog, okay? But let's say somebody has an invisible disability. We're going back to that issue of invisible disability. You could ask two questions. Is this a service dog? It's the first question you can ask. The second is, what task has this animal been trained to perform for you? Remember, Steve mentioned a couple of minutes ago that that the animal has to be trained to ameliorate something that's affecting a major life area. Okay, so you can ask, is it a service animal, and what task does that animal perform? And those are the two questions. You can't ask about somebody's disability. And I think actually that may be on the next slide. Let's go to here. Oh, no, but it's coming up. So I'm going to stop and let you do this.
So let's do a couple true or false, okay? And just yell out whether you think the answer is. Under the ADA, service animals must wear a vest or tags identifying them as service animals. We've already made some reference to this. Probably already heard the answer. False.
False.
You're wrong. No, you're wrong. Go ahead.
Although we do have in the room, we have one dog who is wearing a vest and
Yeah.
one who's wearing a harness. So.
Right,
You
go
can
ahead.
get a vest on.
Oh, honey, we're going to talk about that. That's a cottage industry that's coming. So go ahead.
So under the ADA, animals are not required to wear vests or other items indicating that they are service animals, nor is the owner required to provide a doctor's note verifying the animal's function. Other laws, like you said before, Fair Housing Act and the Air Carriers Act, do require some verification. And in some situations, people may not want to know what their disability is anyway. So, okay, so this is kind of funny. Go ahead. So if you want, this is an ad for, this is not on Amazon. These are available anywhere you want to. You can pretty much convince anybody that you have a service dog. And the funny part about this one is it comes with 50 free ADA info cards to pass out to people. So you can take your dog, you can buy this without any certification, without any paperwork, and then it gives you a nice little card to pass out to business owners or whoever comes into contact with to tell what your rights are under the ADA.
And it's for the low, low price of $28.96.
Or you could spend $20,000 to get your dog actually trained in a service dog. So you see the issue here, right?
Right.
This is one of thousands of ads just on Amazon. This is not talking eBay or any of the other places out there. And I have seen these at PetSmart as well.
Yep.
No, you have not. I work there.
No?
No.
No.
Sorry.
Petco? Petco.
Chewy.com has them.
Chewy.com.
Chewy does? Oh, darn. I won't be buying my,
You can buy them, at dog shows. And it's not a service dog vest specifically. It's one of those random vests, and then they'll have patches that'll say all
Yeah.
kind of things.
That's what I thought.
Some
you were
of
talking about,
which,
yeah.
but yeah, no, you can't get that at PetSmart.
Look at that.
let's ask another question. Just, and this is in review. So to determine if an animal is a service animal, you can ask two questions. Is it a service animal, and what work has it been trained to perform? Just trying to beat that home, right? Okay. So you can't ask about somebody's disability. You can't ask for some sort of documentation because there isn't any. They're not going to have something that says this is a certified animal. And I think either my slide or maybe your slide, it says that you could get a certificate that says this is a service animal. You won't have an identification card. You cannot ask, and this is important, you can't ask for the handler to demonstrate what the dog is trained to do. So you can only ask those two questions. Now, so Steve, I've got a cartoon up here, and it's a police lineup with 5 dogs and a policeman and a fire hydrant. It says, "Number 4, would you please step forward and raise your left hind leg?" So we need to keep in mind that the ADA, remember, does not provide preferential treatment, but rather equal opportunity. So with that said, handlers have responsibilities as well. The first is the dog, or in some cases a horse, but let's limit it to dogs. The dog has to be under the handler's control at all time. And that could be by voice command, it could be by harness, it could be by leash, it could be by tether, but that dog has to be under control at all time. If for some reason the dog is not under control, let's say that it's acting aggressively or it's acting erratically, then you can be asked, as a handler, the business owner can ask you to remove that dog. Okay, and we'll talk more about that in a second. But I want to stop for a minute and kind of relay a story. I had a conversation with a guy who teaches middle school somewhere in Florida. This may be a year ago, and he was very apprehensive because a student was going to bring a service animal into the classroom. And this guy was thinking, how many things could possibly go wrong here? The kids are going to be distracted. They're going to want to pet the animal. The dog's going to be out of control. It's going to come over and puddle in the corner or something. So we talked about it a little bit. I get a phone call from him a couple of weeks later. Said, you have no idea how wrong I was. The dog is practically invisible in the classroom environment. I don't even know the dog is there. That's an attribute of a great service animal. That if the general public doesn't notice anything unusual, for instance, the dogs who are in the room with us today are invisible to us, right? They're tucked under a table, tucked under a chair, and they're completely under control of the people who brought them. So that's the hallmark of a great dog, great service animal. So. My slide or your slide?
This is yours.
This is mine. Okay. So as we mentioned, the dog does not have to wear a vest or anything that identifies it as a service animal. You don't have to have that documentation. You can ask about the disability, and you can ask again what the dog is trained to do. Yes, ma'am.
It's my understanding that if the person does not answer the two legal questions, then they don't have to be allowed. Is that accurate information?
Steve, I'm going to defer to you on that.
I couldn't
You
hear
want-
the question.
It's my understanding that if a gatekeeper asks the two legal questions when someone enters an establishment and the handler refuses to answer one or both questions, then they do not have to allow that animal into the establishment. Is that correct information?
I
That
don't
would
think
be,
it is.
I don't think that's correct. They can ask if it's a service animal. The second question, what function has the animal been trained to perform, is a little iffy. I know it's written down, but there's some division about this. For instance, if you have a dog that's trained to assist you because you have post-traumatic stress disorder and you don't want to disclose that, you really don't have to.
Yeah, that would be disclosing your disability. Typically, I hear a lot of handlers say something like they assist me or alert me, and they give a vague answer so that they don't disclose their disability.
Correct.
Right. Right.
It
But
kind of defeats the purpose of the two questions. It gives the gatekeeper no, if there's no vest and they don't have to answer the questions, they
So-
can still enter, and
Yeah.
that'd be a slippery slope.
So I'm going to make more cogent and formal remarks toward the end of this, but let me just add something here. Service dogs are trained to perform functions for their disabled handlers. When a service dog enters a public establishment, the rule of thumb is that that dog, as Barry pointed out, has to be under perfect control. There are people who will pretend to have a service dog so they can bring the dog on the airplane or to the restaurant. But the truth is those dogs were not trained as service dogs, have not had substantial training, and when they act up, they can be asked to leave. And it's important to remember that because, if you invite someone into your restaurant, admit someone who says they have a service dog, and when they get in there, the dog is eating food off the table or, lunging out from under the booth and nipping the ankles of someone, you can just simply have that customer leave immediately. And I think sometimes we forget that there's a deep responsibility on the service animal handler. We get so interested in whether this is a real service animal or not that we forget that there is an incredibly powerful dynamic built into the law that says that whoever has this dog has to be an incredibly great citizen. And the only reason I bring that up is that there was a woman a couple years ago who wrote an article for the New York Daily News about how she succeeded in bringing her untrained poodle to a number of New York restaurants by saying it was a service dog, and they let her in, and then it began eating off the table and knocking things over. And the whole gist of this article was that, see, the whole service dog thing is fraudulent. It was a really badly written piece of journalism, or faux journalism, but of course, consider the source, the New York Daily News. But I was asked on a radio program about that, and I said, but you see, the point is that no real service dog would do any of those things, and no restaurant owner has to endure that.
Right.
So anyway, I'll come back to this.
Yeah, that's good.
A question I get too about having the animal under control, I've been asked this twice, is that how does that apply if the dog defecates? Or that is definitely not under control. So if that happened in a public entity, they could definitely ask you to leave.
Correct. Now, if they do, and that's the third point on this slide too, is if there is an animal that is out of control, and let's say it has to be removed for whatever reason, that does not bar the handler from being able to obtain the goods or services of the store that they went into. So then some other modification to practice and policy needs to be made by the shop owner to allow the handler to complete his or her business in the store. Okay? Even if the dog has been removed, that does not bar the person with a disability from equal opportunity to those goods and services. So, yes, ma'am.
Barry, is there any legal definition or guideline on what nuisance behavior would consist of from an animal that's a service dog? For example, a dog, a guide dog that barks, or a dog that does bracing for someone, that growls at somebody being too close. You know, would those behaviors?
You're asking if there's some sort of guidance from someone?
Yes.
On that.
Or is it become a case-by-case basis where a business owner asks someone to leave, but yet they have a dog that qualifies for public
right.
access?
So,
well,
so I would
go ahead, Steve.
let me just jump in and say that if you have a service dog that is growling at customers,
Yeah.
the business owner can leave. That qualifies as not being under control of the owner.
Right.
And so it really is that operative phrase, being under control. And so if the business owner says, can you get your dog under control? That's a reasonable expectation. The law says that they have the right to ask that. And if that dog continues to growl or snap at customers, or it's barking during the opera, I mean, I have to tell you, I love the Metropolitan Opera in New York City. And I've been to many operas with my guide dogs, none of whom has ever made a sound. Oh, there goes the family. We have a rescue dog. He's a Lhasa Apso. He's from Tibet, and right now he's barking at the mailman.
He was barking on cue is what he was doing. That was great.
Really? Harley. Here, bud.
So while Steve tries to get his service or his emotional support animal under control, the other point that I want to make sure that we make is the second bullet point here on the slide, which says that, you know, even if somebody is allergic to a dog, or maybe has had a bad experience in the past, and that is not an excuse to exclude a service animal from coming into a shop, a store, or an environment. So, you know, and this would be true. I think you're going to ask a bonus question about employment later, but let's say there is a service animal in an employment environment. Somebody says, well, no, I'm allergic to dogs. That does not exclude, you know, some other modification or alteration would need to be made, because you're not going to exclude that service animal. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to say Lyft drivers and Uber drivers are also not allowed to not let you have your service dog.
That is the new frontier, isn't it? The question or the statement was Uber drivers, Lyft drivers cannot exclude a service animal from jumping into the vehicle with their handler.
It also applies to Airbnb.
Yeah.
There's actually somebody texting me.
Go ahead.
Did we answer her question? I mean, she asked, if I understood it correctly, if someone in a business asks a person with a service dog those two questions, does that person have to answer those questions?
They do not have to answer those questions, because what it came down.
No, yeah, I understood there was no answer.
Okay, I missed that.
Right. Well, yeah. So to be more straightforward about it is, because you're running a fine line there of involuntarily disclosing disability.
Is there case law on that?
On involuntarily
Somebody
disclosing?
not answering the questions?
I
right, well,
would say
so-
yes.
Question, I know.
I would say yes, but I'll tell you the best thing you could do.
Yeah.
1-800-949-4232. My staff will research that for you.
I can call that.
Let me weigh in here.
Yep,
You can ask someone if it's a service dog.
right.
You can't ask them what their disability is. And
But the
so
question, Steve, is do they have to answer you?
Do they have to answer the
The
legal questions to be
the only question they have to answer is it a service dog?
So they do.
I don't know. Yep.
Legislators. man.
I know. Okay. So Jason has another question for you.
So here's the true or false. Places of public accommodation must assist individuals with service animals by providing water for the animal or taking the animal out to eliminate. Seems pretty obvious,
How
right?
many say yes? Anybody? It'd be kind of a nice thing to do, right? But no.
So this is really the only reason why this question's in here, just so we can put this in the.
So the picture is a meme of a dog with a scoop and broom scooping up their own poop. It says pooper scooper, that would be nice, wouldn't it?
So again, the care of the animal is solely the owner's responsibility, and it should be.
Right.
Right, it goes back to that, having the animal under control, directing the services that it's providing.
Okay. So this was this is a screenshot I took from Facebook a couple of weeks ago. Now the interesting thing, and the thing that made it so fascinating for me is, and I couldn't get it into the picture, but you know how Facebook goes, right? So the thing right above this ADAregistry.com was some post that Steve Kusisto had about his dog or something. And I thought it was rather telling that then right after a post by Steve Kusisto, I see this ADAregistry.com, how to make your dog a service dog. Many people don't know they qualify. So, and then it says, you can take your dog anywhere. So we do want to talk about service dog fraud for a second, because it's especially in some areas of the country has become a very very difficult experience for folks. So there are, we know, and you know, we've added to the confusion here. You've got the ADA, right? But then you also have the requirements under Fair Housing. You have the requirements under Air Carriers Access Act that are different than that of the ADA. So we've added to the confusion. But what we have here basically is people trying to pawn off Fido as being a service animal. And Fido is not a service animal. So they've gone to these registries, these cottage industry places, and you know, poof, my dog is a service animal. I will tell you that currently there are 24 states that have laws that criminalize service animal fraud. Additionally, there are 3 states that have other related fraud laws. I am sitting in Kentucky, in Lexington, Kentucky today. Kentucky does not have a law that addresses service fraud, service dog fraud. I know we have a number of people on the call today or on the Zoom from Florida. Florida does. In 2015, they passed a law that makes service dog fraud a second-degree misdemeanor, punishable by a $500 fine, and or 60 days in jail. On top of that, Wyoming has done Florida one better. I know we have some folks from Wyoming on Zoom today. Wyoming, it is a misdemeanor, and the fine is $750 for claiming your dog fraudulently is a service animal. So that's it, right? We're done. We're done talking about service animals. Now, As we mentioned before, there are some competing laws. There are some things that have nuanced differences that further complicate the issue. One is the Air Carriers Access Act. Under the Air Carriers Act, a service animal or emotional support and comfort animals can fly on airplanes. The only requirement is if I want to take Fido on a plane as an emotional support animal, I have to have some sort of documentation from a medical professional that I need to have that animal on the airplane with me for some sort of anxiety or for some reason in order for me to fly. Further complicates the issue. We mentioned before fair housing. Yes, fair housing says that landlords need to make modification to policy to allow service animals and comfort or emotional support animals for rental property. So if you are a landlord and you have 4 or more units in an apartment building, then you must comply with the Fair Housing Act and the laws requiring emotional support and service animals. And in order to do that, if I'm a handler, I have to have some sort of documentation, again, from a healthcare professional that that dog is necessary for some sort of emotional or comfort support in my life.
And it doesn't have to be a doctor.
That's true, a medical professional.
Is it 4 or more units, like if a landlord owns 5 single-family homes that are for rent, or in
Yeah, right, correct,
Okay.
right,
so just
yes,
4 more units
Right.
total, no matter what kind of house.
correct. And you have a, wait, Walt, you have a question?
It's a question from Ruthie online. Airports and service animals are a hot topic. The courts are all over the place on where the ADA and the ACAA begin and end.
That's correct.
The ADA and the ACAA are at odds on the definitions.
Well, it's not that they're at odds, but they have different definitions. And as a result of these different definitions, we have confusion. I mean, they're not in opposition to each other. They are addressing different aspects of case law.
What is your opinion of the current status of service animals and air travel?
My opinion is it's out of control. That's just my opinion. I mean, the pictures that we showed you before of the large pig and the peacock, those were both animals that were granted the ability to be on a plane with someone,
Among others.
among many others. Yeah. And I think part of it, you know, is the documentation is so difficult to get.
Right.
Right. It's kind of the same argument as accessible parking placards.
Now, I will tell you that Steve does a lot of travel, so I'm sure he will have a lot to say in a few minutes on this topic. But yes, we have created a situation we have seen where airlines have revised their policies. Delta has, American has. We have through Southeast ADA Center. I have a member of my staff who sits on the ADA advisory board for Hartsfield Jackson Atlanta International Airport. It's the biggest airport in the world. When you die, you change planes in Atlanta. So stay with me. So yes, this is a hot topic among the major airports as well, is how do we respect the rights of all people, and especially, so keep in mind, Air Carrier Access Act doesn't apply in the terminal.
That's right.
Right? So the ADA applies in the terminal. Air Carrier Access Act does not apply until somebody's on the airplane. So it's an interesting conundrum that I'm sure Steve will have a lot to say. Yes, ma'am.
Regarding the Fair Housing Act, is there a number of comfort animals a person
That's a
could
good
have?
question.
So if a person's training a replacement because their initial dog is aging out,
I am not aware of a number. That would be a good question for my staff. I can tell you that I had a call that I took it was last year, from 4 girls who were students at University of Kentucky who were all sharing an apartment All four of them had comfort animals, and the landlord said, do I have to do this? And yes, in that situation, that landlord had to accommodate all those animals.
Because it was 4 dogs, 4
Right,
people.
right.
But in this other scenario, it would be 1 person.
Right.
2
And I'm not sure, yeah,
I just wanted to say, I've actually read that law and there's nothing about how many.
right.
you can have.
Yeah.
So the renter or the person really wouldn't, the landlord couldn't dictate.
But there could be a competing law. If you have a law in Fayette County, Kentucky, for instance, that limits the number of animals in total, regardless of their classification, then that law would supersede.
And there is a city ordinance.
I think it's like 7.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
7.
7.
Wow.